my damage personally is going to skyrocket in that fight, by the way.
Let's go ahead and get started. Tonight's music is going to be brought to you by Dmitri Shostakovich, one of my favorite symphonies from him, Symphony Number 5.
That sounds way too foreign for me to ever listen to, dog.
I love Mambo number 5.
So, all right.
I got it, Alec. I got it.
Before
Thank
we
I didn't.
officially get going, I do want to point out something with where this lesson actually sits. So, basically, with this lesson, we are starting to get into what I would describe as high-level fundamental concepts. While these are still in the fundamental realm, they are beginning to get to a place where most players would have never thought about this, and most players never even considered this something part of the game. So on this little quick graph I've whipped up in Paint, you can see red is the general level of player, right? So you have AOTC, CE, top 500, top 100, and world first. The blue lines are the first 3 lessons we've had and where they're respectively placed and targeting types of players / where those lessons can start to let you reach. This lesson, on the other hand, is going to be the largest jump between lessons we've had, sitting somewhere around here. So this is going to be a much more complex lesson. So if you guys at any point have questions, please feel free to stop me and we can discuss further. Do keep in mind that this lesson is, in fact, the Build-A-Player series, Episode 4, Crafting Consistency, Part 1. So there will be a second part to this, but regardless, if you have questions, then let me know.
I thought this was going to be about crafting as in professions. That makes way more sense.
You're an idiot.
That's why I showed up.
Brother.
I'm like, why does he have a lesson about crafting? I'm sorry.
Because everyone needs adaptive jacket to storm guards.
Oh, yeah. Fuck
I
that.
can confidently say you're the dumbest motherfucker here. Fuck.
Understanding the crafting system is
Hell
very
yeah.
important for raid.
So before we get diving into how to create consistency, first I pose a question. Vel, what is consistency?
Something that I don't have.
Oh.
Fair. Anyone? Go ahead.
Within a raid setting, it's taking similar actions every time you do a poll for similar results and trying to, slowly improve those results, but doing similar things every time.
And
I'll go a step further. It's doing the exact same thing every single pull for hundreds of pulls straight.
It's the opposite.
In an ideal
definition
world.
of insanity.
And what do we? What is one word that kind of summarizes that?
Scripting. Oh.
Huh?
Scripting?
Not exactly. I mean, what is
But
a
scripting
word
can
that
help you
that is true? What is a word that basically means doing the same thing over and over again?
Repetition.
Yeah, repeatability. Sorry, my dog's going ham. 1 second, let me curtail the pupper.
Get him, dog. Kill him.
Huh? Just like that? Right
Fuck
now?
that mailman up.
Fucking thought it was about crafting. Dude, I can't get over that.
I just, glanced over the title and I'm like,
All right.
huh,
I
that's
want you
weird.
to know, I got 3K today with this guy in my fucking room.
So,
I was
we
playing a warlock.
I heard somebody say it, but consistency really boils down to one simple thing. Repeatability, right? So this is a consistent pattern because it repeats itself over and over and over again. That's what you're trying to do when we're talking about creating consistency. We're not actually trying to think of consistency as this abstract thing of I'm just trying to be consistent. You think repeatability, the exact same thing as Alden said, over and over and over again. So now, what actually is a consistent player? So I have two players here. I have player number 1, and I have player number 2. Which player do you think is more consistent?
Player number 3.
Player number 2, it looks like.
Wait,
Player
oh,
number
where? Oh my
Number
god.
one.
I forgot you're streaming. I'm an idiot.
Be player 1.
It's
Go
player 1.
player 1.
Player 1.
So, yes, player 1 is the more consistent player. And the reason why we know that is if you look at the top right, you'll see the median performance average on both of these players. While they're both high, it's clear that player number 2, 1, required many, many, many more kills, which means that he had more time to bring his median parse up, as well as get a best parse. And player 1 has far fewer kills and maintained a 99.2, meaning on prog, he was likely doing around this amount of damage. That means that player number 1 is a more consistent player, while player number 2 may be a more precise player, or simply just has a differing goal of going for rank 1 parses. So that's kind of a concept of what consistency is. Looking at best performance average doesn't actually tell you how good a player is. It's much more so this median performance average that you should be looking at. So what are the foundation of consistency? Well, really it's two things. We have cognitive load, or sometimes you'll hear it called mental bandwidth. Either or, they're the same thing. And then you have layers of consistency. So what do you guys think cognitive load exactly means?
Can I take this one?
Go for it.
It's having a whole bunch of information that you need to apply to the raid, especially. So, like, you have your rotation, and then if you're using externals or not, if you're a healer, are you healing? And that load is drastically changed based on your settings, such as having a raid leader. That's my answer, if that helps.
Mr. Teacher, can I give my answer?
Yes, Alec, go ahead.
I think it's just the amount of shit you have to process. The less amount of stuff you can have to process, the better.
Both of those are generally correct. Cognitive
Yay!
load on a base level is how much you're currently having to think about. And if we imagine your brain as having 100% capacity, cognitive load would be the amount of capacity that you're devoting to each individual thing. So if we were to look at that, we can see that, well, passive thinking, no matter how many things that are happening passively, always encompasses 10%. No matter what, even if you're shoving a bunch of things into passive is always 10%. Why that's important to know is that's the entire concept behind moving active to passive. If you, for example, are very intensely thinking about your positioning, maybe positioning is, 50% of what you're trying to think about. As you move, maybe 40% of that positioning out and put it into passive, then you don't suddenly have, 40% more on your passive coggy load. Now it is simply just you have 40% more room to work with in your head. Cognitive load is important to understand because you might be thinking, 40% about your rotation, 20% about mechanics, 30% about positioning. But why that's important to understand is we need to know how to reduce this. Because if we reduce our cognitive load and we understand where our cognitive load currently is, that's the foundation for us to jump off of so that we can then build consistency. So one great example of cognitive load and how it's important to becoming better as a player is you have, I'm not an artist, Mies, thank you, okay? One thing that's important is you have the world first raiders, right? Clearly, they're trying to be the most consistent that they possibly can because that's how they make their living. They have to be consistent pull to pull so they can kill the boss quicker so that they can win the race. So if you look at the Race to World First guys, they're great examples of things that are really important. And what's one thing you notice the Race to World First do that pretty much nobody else does and was a thing that was invented specifically for the Race to World First that you think might be related to cognitive load?
21st man.
Weak auras.
Both of those are good.
Both good answers. Yeah.
The one I was primarily looking at was 21st Man. So World First Raiders started the 21st man thing because originally, if you have a raid leader in the raid, this is what his thought process is. He has still his 10% passive thinking side, but 50% of it is going towards raid leading, but really it's 70% going towards raid leading. But 20% is just purely devoted to vision. And vision is just a simple term to say looking at what the raid is currently doing and processing that so that you can raid lead. Then his positioning and mechanics is shoved all the way to 10%, and his rotation, you notice that it's not on here, is actually shoved into the passive thinking bubble. That's why it's really common for raid leaders to generally not do as good damage. It's because they're fully passive with their rotation. They don't have room to think about their rotation actively. And what this does to your brain whenever you have a raid leader is you now no longer have to think about mechanics and positioning nearly as much. You can focus on something that you are currently struggling with. Let's say it's your rotation. You have bad throughput. So you start pouring all that extra positioning and mechanic free space into your rotation. Maybe you do actually struggle with positioning, so you just decide to keep positioning where it is, but now your positioning is much easier because your raid leader is taking off that mental load. The whole concept behind raid leading is reducing one player's coggy load, or increasing one player's coggy load by about 50% to reduce all the other players' coggy load by about 50%. That's the entire goal of a raid leader. It's important to understand that because you need to utilize the raid leader and also need to utilize the fact that you have this free bandwidth, this free cognitive space to apply to things that you may be struggling with. The difference between having a raid leader and not having a raid leader is huge. This doesn't mean that you're suddenly doing worse on mechanics and positioning. This means that you can do the same with significantly less thought going into mechanics and positioning due to raid leading. That's why the Race to World First guy is 21st man. Because they're 21st manning, now Max is purely thinking about raid leading. That's all he needs to focus on, which means he can do an even better job, and their whole ideas here, maybe they're thinking 90% on rotation because Max is doing so many things for them because he's 21st manning. That is why 21st man is successful and why it was implemented in the first place. So again, if you understand your cognitive load and different ways to offset it, like Rena said previously, weak auras are a great way to offset cognitive load. Weak auras are pretty much your personal raid leader. They tell you things that you need to know, give you information that is more readily available, or create sound cues, which we'll talk about later, to make you consistently do the same thing. That is important to unlock consistency. The more that you can put cognitive load towards the things which make you consistent, the more consistent you will be. So, how do we reduce cognitive load? Well, the first and foremost is information. Information encompasses everything in WoW. The more information you have available to you does not mean the better, though. We need information that is important and easy to comprehend. This would be a great way to look at your weak auras and think, okay, can I delete any of these? Because you don't want weak auras which don't matter. What happens whenever you have weak auras which don't matter? Well, you stop paying attention to them, which means that suddenly now you're not necessarily paying attention to the weak auras which really do matter, which means that you're increasing your cognitive load because you're having to actively delete certain weak auras from your brain and then turn on certain other ones whenever they appear. Another great example of this is raid leading. Once again, if your raid leader is just simply a bigwigs timer and you are 400, 500 pulls into the boss, and every single time he calls firestorms, 3, 2, 1, blazes, 3, you're going to tune him out because you no longer need that information. It's no longer worth the cognitive load for you to listen to your raid leader because he's just a fucking bigwigs timer. You know what's coming next. That's an example of how you have to be careful with information. Information has to be valuable to you, and it has to be something that you actually need to help you, and you cannot have excess information. But having the information that is important easily and readily available through weak auras, sound cues, or leadership is the first step to reducing your cognitive load and really unlocking the portions of your brain to focus on things that you actually struggle with. The next part of that is the pyramid. The pyramid is something we'll get into in just a minute. That's a more complex topic. Then avoiding overloading and underloading. So simply put, overloading and underloading is looking at this diagram of a brain. If you're overloading your rotation, let's say that you are putting 60% of your thought towards your rotation because you think that that's what you struggle with most. But in reality, if you put 40% of that thought towards your rotation, you would achieve the same performance or than 1%. That is not worth it to have 60% of your thought then on your rotation. You should reallocate to a different space. How do you determine that within a RAID setting? Basically, it's hypothesis testing. So for one pool in particular, you're 60% focusing on your rotation and you fuck up one of the mechanics like the dispels on Forgotten Experiments. You didn't realize you had the bomb. So the next pool, you decide, okay, I'm going to focus a lot more on the bomb and not think about my rotation as much. You're going to transfer the 20% here over to mechanics. Then you realize, you check in details or in logs, and you see, hey, I actually didn't lose that much damage. Maybe you lost like 5k DPS, 10k DPS. Well, typically that's worth it, especially early on during prog. That's an example of overloading and underloading. Underloading in that case would be from the mechanic point of view. You didn't notice the bomb, you fucked up the bomb, so you were underloading on mechanics. You need to constantly analyze yourself and think, what was I thinking about? Because if you don't know what you were thinking about, how can you fix the problem in the first place? So now let's get into one of the important bits of information, your UI. You guys have heard me talk about UI multiple times, but why do I talk about it? What is a good UI? Why is UI important? These are all fair questions. Well, the whole concept behind UI is that you want the information that is most important to be centralized and closer towards the middle of your screen. The reason why is that your focus generally is going to be on the middle of your screen where your character is. If it's not on the middle of your screen, you have a fundamental problem. You are going to struggle with swirlies, ground effects, and quick reaction time mechanics. Anything to do with those three, if your focus, let's say that you're this player with default UI on a 1920 by 1080 monitor, you're going to have to be looking at the bottom of your screen for your rotation. Then you're not going to notice a swirly spawn under your feet or a very quick reaction mechanic when someone fucks up a blaze and moves it on top of you because you're too focused all the way down to the bottom of your screen. The same applies for information that isn't super valuable. If we had this really cluttered near the center of our screen, just giving us a ton of info, a massive info dump, then that would then not be a good UI. Because simply, we need our UI to show us just what's really important to us. One really important thing with UI as well is sound cues. In case you don't know, your brain actually reacts significantly faster to sound cues than it does to visual stimulation. So if you have a sound cue, let's say you're doing Mythic Plus, right? And you hear a sound cue say, targeted. That's immediately going to tell you, hey, I probably need to press a defensive, right? If you are inside of Mythic Plus and you hear something say frontal, then you're going to get off the tank. Like no thought behind it. You just get off the tank. You can use that same concept inside of RAID. Let's say that you fuck up a mechanic. One really important thing with UI is having the skill to identify issues within it. If you fuck up a mechanic, then you should immediately think, okay, is there anything that I can do to not have that happen again, right? So let's say you have the bomb on Forgotten Experiments. Instead of reducing your rotational cognitive load because you realized, hey, I took that 20% off and I lost a lot of fucking damage. Well, what you can then do is make a weak aura that whenever you get the bomb, just does this. Bomb. 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 It's fixed. Like that. Done. Instantly. It's fixed. Because you're never going to miss that again.
Cognitive load too.
Exactly. So one of the things that the World First guys do so well is, especially in Mythic Plus, massive in Mythic Plus if you're a Mythic Plus pusher, is they will die to something. They do not give a single fuck if they thought it was stupid. They will immediately go get a weak aura for it, install it, and then done. They never have to worry about it again. They're going through M+, they got targeted by 2 slimy bolts and it killed them. Now they have a weak aura that tells them whenever they're targeted by 2 or more casts, it just says targeted. And then they know, press a defensive. They missed a Shadow Meld on the fucking Razan in Ataldazar. They have a weak aura, which now says Shadow Meld. And there you go, it's done. So use your UI and adapt your UI as you go through. Now, I'm going to show you guys a few photos of different UIs, and I want you guys to tell me if you think it's good or bad and why. So our first UI here. Is this a good UI? Is it a bad UI, and why?
I'm going to go bad.
I'm gonna say that's pretty good.
Can I go neutral and say it's in the middle?
I think it's dog shit.
Yeah, I think it's decent. It's okay.
Well, I mean,
his
he
player
has,
frame is huge.
well, he
It's
has
got
everything
block space.
consolidated in the middle, and then he has like his entire fucking screen cleared to like see the raid, right?
But he
I
has
do- I
I
do
get
worry
it.
about having that many icons, though. Like,
That's
a lot of that might not be needed.
yeah.
My issue is I feel like it's very cluttered and kind of condensed, and also certain mechanics might be very difficult to see with all of that in the middle of the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Like
He's
you
also
don't
a
need all
blood
that
DK.
shit.
He only
Also,
needs
if
4
bags
of those.
overlap his healing meters.
Yeah,
Oh,
like,
oh
Okay.
god.
That's what I noticed.
I think
like,
there's
how
too
do you
much.
work with that?
I think there's too much irrelevant information on this UI, which
Yeah.
would make it a bad UI.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah. Like this guy, like he'll be able to see swordies and shit that are like below him, but he can't see anything if he started stepping backwards. Like he'll just step into another one.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, no,
Like,
he's
I-
got a decent amount of space between him and his bars, I think.
I think this is better than base UI, but it's not optimal.
He's a
It could be a
PvPer.
lot better.
I'm also
Yeah.
gonna go with that his player and target frames are incredibly too large. I feel like, why do you have your information like that? That seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
he
The
cares
bars are
about
fine, but the
numero
player
uno.
frames are bad.
So
himself.
But he's a PvPer.
Well, the thing-
I
It's
want
also
to point out a few things on this UI that I would determine this as kind of like what Alex said. It's better than base, but there's a couple big problems. So this guy's a Blood Death Knight, as you can tell by his runes. So he's a tank. So we can excuse a little bit of this fucking health bar being massive. But what are you primarily looking at on Blood DK, right? What is the most important thing to you on a Blood Death Knight?
Standing in Death and Decay.
Runic
Trans-
power.
It is your runic power and your runes right here. And look at how far away, if we were to draw his focus circles here, look at how far away his runic power and his runes are from his character. So we know that he's going to be looking at this information consistently, right? He has to. This is the most important info to him. The other most important thing is his blood shield, which we can't currently see here, but we can assume that it either pops up here, and this looks like a weak aura-less UI, where you're not going to be able to tell exactly, it's not going to pop up here, clearly, right? So the main problem that I have with this UI is, one, a bit of information overload just with, or underload, sorry, just with, like, you're not going to know your procs super efficiently. You're not going to know your blood shield stacks. But the biggest thing to me is the most important thing to him is nowhere near the middle of his screen. If he was to just simply take this and put it right there, this UI is twice as good, if not more than that. That would almost fix the entire UI. Yes, he would need a couple weak auras for these abilities here. For those of you who don't know how Blood DK works, I won't go into details. But otherwise, this is close, but this ruins it. Because the most important info should always be closest to the center of your screen, not the other way around. Why would we have Asphyxiation and Gorfine's Grasp close to the middle of our screen whenever we're pressing these buttons on very rare occasions, right? So now, next UI.
Ew.
Bad.
Gross.
Absolute tragedy.
I think it
Hey, that's my
depends
UI.
on if there's weak auras that pop up.
Okay,
I
so
honestly want to shoot myself.
There are no weak auras that pop up.
Then bad. But he does have his rage centered.
This is basically base UI.
I feel like this would be good for mechanical play. Like, if you're really focusing on mechanics and positioning, because you got a pretty clear fucking screen. But all of his information is at the bottom of the screen. So his rotation's going to struggle, if not just be impossible to do, in my opinion. At least properly.
I mean, he's a
Does
melee.
he even have like boss timers or anything? Like nothing.
Yeah, so basically this guy has all of his information that he needs to see way down there. This is a arms warrior, and he's playing with his information at the very bottom of the screen, which means that his eyes are going to be looking here so often that he's never going to be able to survive a lot of the mechanics inside of the game, just simply because he can't see them.
He's gonna keep flipping up and down like halfway up.
Yep.
He's got to look at his rage bar too.
So he'll miss things that are down here, and he'll miss things that are up here. And for some reason, he knew that his rage bar was important, and he decided to move it off of the bottom of his frame right here and move it into the middle, which is a good concept, but then he has everything else which is important to him all the way down here. How does he know whenever his Whirlwind's off CD? He simply doesn't. How does he know whenever Colossus Smash is off CD? He doesn't. He has to look all the way down here. So once again, the fundamental concept of you need to have this near the middle of your screen, most important being, your rage bar, your CDs here, need to be closest to the center of your screen, is still the issue with this UI. All right, let's move on. This is a healer, for reference.
Oh, healers.
I feel like this is pretty good for a healer.
I'm gonna go good, yeah.
Any other opinions?
It's a lot. I'm gonna say that.
It is a lot, but it's a healer. They have to be cooking, so I
It's
don't
a
know.
little
The thing on
cluttered.
the left or on the right is that externals.
Those are externals.
Externals,
Map.
and there's raid CDs on the.
I feel like
that
they're
it'll
tracking
rate
too
ours.
much.
Hold up.
It's
Hold up.
just
Actually,
just-
I mean,
if this is a healer UI, it's bad. If it's a raid leader UI, I think it's good.
This
Yeah, I
is
was gonna
just
say
a
they're
healer.
tracking too much.
I think it's probably like passable at the very least. Like those are small enough where you're not gonna it's not gonna like block your FOV.
My only
Really?
main problem with it is that
I don't
the
know why the maps are like that. The
It's
maps
just so
are-
cluttered. It hurts my
Well,
eyes. It actually
maps
just
are
hurts my
like-
eyes.
The maps are super cursed, but I think tracking the externals and the raid CDs is fine.
Okay. So a few problems with this UI, and I included this one in here because I think it's a classic example of a UI that's close to good but has one big problem. It's just too hard to digest. There is too much going on, and information is not in a clear position to where it's easy to know things at a glance. So a few examples of that would be right here with the emphasized bars. Number one, why is he tracking a mechanic that's coming in over 50 seconds? That doesn't need to be there. Why is this, how he has these set up, being where these are both at 2.3 seconds, but their bars are completely different? Why is he tracking all of these debuffs on Xavius? Why does he need to know that? Why does he need to have multiple target frames? Here, here. Why does he have to have multiple boss frames? Here, here, and here. On top of all of that, he is tracking all these raid CDs, but these don't matter to him. Yes, if you're pugging something, sure, but this is Mythic Xavius. He's not pugging this. The same applies for these externals over here. Sure, tracking externals is great, but you're a healer. You need to be reacting to externals almost immediately whenever someone is going low, right? It's not a deal of, oh, let me quickly flick my eyes over here and then flick them back, right? You need to know that these are up and that you don't need to use one. Let's see, like you see Pain Sup has been used. You don't want to know that, okay, Pain Sup's been used, flip back over here, there's no Pain Sup, I'm going to use now. That's too slow. The same applies for just a lot of info that doesn't need to be here. This doesn't need to be here. This note should be hidden. This,
Hey,
yes, this is
yeah.
duplicated multiple times. This is a range map
And it's
for
still in the
Mythic
top right.
Xavius. So there's just too much happening here. It's too weirdly placed as well to where it's not quick and natural for your eyes to go to things. All right, next UI.
Let's
Cursed.
go.
This is a banger.
This one's
That's
based
perfect.
as fuck.
There's
Look at
Dude,
that image in the
come
top
on.
left.
For the speedometers for the your health bar and boss health bar is fucking genius.
This guy's exempt from all the rules we talked
Yeah,
about. It feels
I
crazy.
I know what you're gonna say, but this is actually goated.
I mean,
go
okay,
with
is the
cosmetic.
BMW is that a raid over or a stream overlay, or is that like on
No,
his
that's
screen?
on
No,
a
that's
screen.
straight up
You
the
weren't,
UI.
you weren't here for this.
be-
Yeah,
to
this
be
was
fair,
this
he's-
was a race to
Jesus
world last
Christ.
night.
He's
I
playing
need
Ret,
to
so like,
know.
how much
How
does he
I'm going
really need to
terrible.
know?
I'm
My
going terrible.
okay. My big question is, what the fuck is the 15 seconds at the top there? I don't know what that's for. It just says 15.
Dream Run?
That's all you need.
I'm guessing it would be for soaks.
Like
Uh,
probably, but that's not
Stormtrap.
Oh no,
intuitive.
that
I
could
think
be how far
I think
he is into the
that's
poll.
fight timer. Yeah, I believe that is his fight timer.
Oh my god.
Okay, okay.
Oh, but
Jesus
he's got a
Christ.
ticket response from
I just
Blizzard.
realized the fucking Ryan Gosling in the corner.
Yeah, dude.
Hell yeah, dude. Fucking.
This really ties it all together.
Yep.
So-
I feel like the disadvantages you get from this are outweighed by the pure like
Psychoticness.
yeah just the pure hilariousness of it. Like it just boosts your play enough that it
The
makes
real-
up for it.
the real cursed fact about this is that a Boomkin is top 5 DPS.
True.
Tragic.
So obviously,
and a feral.
obviously,
It's
this
for sure.
UI is horrible for a lot of the same reasons we previously talked about. But actually, it was almost good enough to be redeemed, but he hasn't responded to his Blizzard ticket, so
Oh.
that takes it down a notch. All right, next UI.
I can't believe he didn't respond to Kai.
Good.
Yeah, it's pretty
Actually,
good.
I'm gonna go
Agree.
great.
I like this
I
Why
feel
are
like this is good.
The damage
Is this-
numbers so fucking
This is
big?
Destro, right? Yeah, this was like
This is a
there's
Destro lock,
Havoc.
yeah.
Is this Tox UI or
Uh,
custom?
oh, okay, those are his soul shards. Yeah, this is.
I mean,
What
besides
the
from
fuck
the
is that
damage
pet
numbers.
attack?
Yeah, and whatever the fuck that is.
Pet attack is letting him know that its pet is not attacking.
Your pet's not a. Yeah, that's pretty. This is. I mean, this is pretty good.
So
Better than
I've
all the other ones
accidentally
I've
left my
seen.
pets on passive too many fucking times.
I'm not gonna say perfect, but I do like this one.
I would make
I
a
think
weak
this one's
war
really good.
to tell you they're on passive.
Why his
But I
health
wouldn't.
bar is like 20 inches long?
Well, okay, phrasing
what?
aside though, he has a weak word to tell him that.
This looks just like Atrocities, just a little different.
Yeah, it's.
I thought it's Tox UI, or is that not Tox UI?
So this is Now UI. It is
Oh.
another one of the professional UI packs that, you know, the guy pretty much makes to make money. Now, why do you think this UI is good, Alec?
It's consolidated. All the important stuff is near the middle. Like, I mean, it might be just a tiny bit more cluttered, but as someone who recently changed from base to atrocity, it's just, I don't know. It's just my eyes don't have to move as much. I don't have to think as much. I don't have to. It's like it's the whole coggy load thing, right? Like I'm able to divert my attention to my surroundings and not have to focus on looking elsewhere or looking at my bars, looking at my rotation. Like it's very nice. And just being able to see, that's like the one thing. I feel like you can't see your feet maybe as well as you could on this, but it's not terrible.
So, yeah, if we take his player focus circles, right? And the fundamental reason why this UI is good is inside of his player circle, player focus that he's going to have. If you just draw the circles around your player, your primary focus, secondary focus, third focus, fourth focus, right? All of the information that is vital to his gameplay is within his natural peripheral vision and his focus window. That is what you're trying to get across. There is no information here apart from this right here. And that's pretty much it. That is within his focus window that he does not need to know urgently. Everything else that is here is vital information to him playing the game. And there is nothing excessive about this. Now, obviously, fight timers should naturally go like right here. As long as, you have fight timers here, you have unemphasized bars somewhere else, then you're good. The only thing that can be said is like this should be hidden just because there's no reason to have this on your screen. I don't believe that this is shown in default now UI, but this is an example of a professional UI that you can just go out and get. You can install this and it's set up ready to go with weak auras, literally everything within like half a second. So if you're sitting here and you're like, oh, my UI fucking sucks, this is an example of something you can get.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I do personally, and I could kind of take a picture and show you, but I put weak auras also on like the right and or left of my character. Is that too much, or do you think that's a good thing? Because it is in the focus area and stuff that I want to know.
That's perfectly fine. You're talking about right here and right here.
Yeah, pretty much.
As long as this is vital info, that's the number one thing. It can't be info that you're going to sit there and it's like, blah, 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 and you're trying to tune this out, because then that automatically means that this is bad. If it's not super vital and you only look at it on occasion, then like put it down here, right?
Here's a question. Okay, so like in that slot, like on the right, basically,
Mhm.
I put Divine Shield, Vengeance, Shield of Vengeance, and then whatever the other defensive is, and my Interrupt.
Where's your health bar?
Action.
My health bar is like to the left, like
So
like yeah.
is
right
it like
there.
where
Yeah,
his
pretty
is?
much. Yeah, pretty much.
So okay, one
and I
thing
have a
I would
weak aura
immediately
that's different
say,
for rotation.
the one thing I would immediately say is like, why are your defensives over there if your health bar is over here? Like that doesn't make sense, right? Because you react
shit,
using your
that's a
health
good
bar.
point. That's a good point.
Yeah, you react using your health bar, and if your defensives are all the way over here, you're having to flick your eyes in between these to be like, okay, I'm low, boom, I see I have, Divine Shield, oh, you're dead. Like, it's too late. So, because defensive, sometimes you got to press those instantly, especially like in Mythic Plus, whenever something goes wrong. So, that's one immediate thing. The other thing is, like, interrupts, I'm perfectly fine with being right here. Like, if you have all your interrupts, that's cool by me. I would just say defensively, they should be. You always want things to be close to what they're related to. You don't want them to be far away.
I never even thought of that, but that like makes a fuck ton of sense.
All right,
It
next
pisses me
UI.
off.
What are we thinking of this one?
That is literally you.
I recognize those names.
Absolutely trash.
I'm gonna go with good.
It's pretty good,
Awful.
except for that they're on council, so that makes me want to kill myself.
Why are
Yep.
two of the bars at the bottom bigger than the ones on the side?
That's just a atrocity thing. That's one's emphasized in the middle for your rotational stuff. The other ones are subsidiary bars.
Sorry, I just joined and I'm not sure if you have covered this already, but the previous screenshot that you took actually had kind of just a question that just popped out of my mind. So you see that sometimes some abilities it has like weird effect around your characters, and I noticed that sometimes this is an annoyance because it obstruct the view of say if there's a powder below your feet and you just can't see it. What is the best way to prevent this?
So
are you
Like this,
talking
this
about
guy, this
combat?
screenshot right here has a blue circle that's around it. But if let's say there's also a fire powder beneath it, how are you going to see it? Like what is your best recommendation?
So the best thing to do is if you actually find yourself struggling with that, you can turn down all of the spell effects to basically completely minimal, and you can turn off everyone else's spell effects to where it only shows swirlies and these are completely gone. That's a base game setting that's just in the options, and you can dig through and find that if you feel that this is distracting you, or you can simply, if you just still want it there, but you don't want it to be as obvious and as distracting, then you can just turn it down. So
take a look at it.
Did you say you think you don't get it, or you do get it?
I would take a look at it.
Okay, got it. So this is my DPS mode UI. Yes, I did intentionally put my UI in DPS mode whenever he went to council. And why do you think this is my UI? What is the concept behind this? Is a slightly customized version of Atrocity.
Wait, it's your. So if this is your UI, there's something I actually have an issue with.
What's that?
You're looking at frames a lot, right? And it's all the way to the left, so you have to snap your vision to the left very often.
Yeah, but he's a DPS.
This
Yeah,
is
he's a warrior.
This is me whenever I put this in DPS mode. I did not have it in my raid leader UI.
Oh, you have a different okay, never
Yeah.
mind then.
Okay, because I was about to talk about cooldowns too.
Yeah, no.
I have
Whenever
a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Why are you tracking B-reses twice?
Where?
Where?
One's right above his damage meter, CR.
That's
and
combat
then-
time.
Oh, I
Combat res.
I do not.
Above it.
To me personally, this is too difficult to see. So while
even
it's
know how to
tracking
look
right
at
here,
that.
I literally never look at this, and I have this here just an additional, and this is
Oh.
completely out of my vision, right? Like I only reference this. It's not completely out of my vision. It's very near, right? But I'm only referencing this whenever I absolutely need to, whenever somebody dies or something like that. So conceptually, this is Atrocity UI. This is pretty much a very, very slightly customized version of Atrocity UI. Why is this good? So Hobbith as an arms warrior has a little bit more reference, but generally the literal most important things, as they get more important, rise up towards the middle of my character. So for example, how long I have left on my Colossus Smash. Hey, you have execute available. My current rend uptime. My current uptime on my CDs. And then my rotational abilities are in order of almost their priority right here. This is almost the priority system for Arms Warrior. I have my melee attack here as well as my cast bar, and I have right here my rage number, right? So
Actually, there is an issue that I'm seeing, and it would appear that you're capped.
oh, that's an Arms Warrior thing. They're always capped.
I feel like maybe you're playing wrong then.
The same thing is over here, where if I had to call out an external, the externals are right on top of where I'm already looking, right? I'm already looking at the frames, so why wouldn't I just have my externals here? The same thing with defensives. I'm looking at my health bar. Hey, I'm low HP. My defensives are right here and right here. So if I need to heal, I look here. If I'm looking for a DR, I look here, and it's right attached to my health bar. Same thing when it comes to boss mechanics. I have things that I don't really need to know are coming in absolutely forever, just off to the side. I don't need this information. It's good for a VOD. That's about it. But right whenever they're emphasized, they move to the center of my screen, inside of my focus. So this is not to say that you have to get a professional UI package, but I've now shown you two different examples of professional UI packages, and there is a reason they look very similar. It's because the concept behind a good UI and what makes a good UI is the more important it is, the closer it is to your character. The less important it is, the further away it goes, right? So keep that in mind.
One thing that I worry about looking at this is that you wouldn't be able to see some things under your feet. I don't know where you are in this picture, but
Well, I'm inside of Urktos, unfortunately, but
oh, okay.
You giving Urktos a business, dude.
I
This
am
is Baldur's Gate 3?
Whoop.
What the fuck?
Can we go? Can we go? I had a question regarding this UI. And it's a very
Mhm.
small and kind of like insignificant detail, but remember how we were talking about you were tracking combat resist twice. One you have in the middle of your screen toward the yeah, right there. Love that. I think that's great. And then you have that one that's not relevant. You said you don't look at.
Mhm.
Is it technically a better play to just delete that?
I mean, yeah, you can.
Like I feel like I know it seems small, but it's like it clears that information off your screen, and you're never like compelled
like,
to look in the direction for that information.
realistically, right? Whenever I'm playing the game, I am like this
Might as well not exist.
does not exist, right? Like all of this does not actually exist. This is the only area of concern to me. So like really, especially down here, this is my details meter. I never fucking look at this in a million years. Like I literally never look at this, especially whenever I'm raid leading. I have a couple other things that pop up here, and like obviously my frames move to right here, and I have CDs move as well over here. But generally, I don't have a lot of like there. I wouldn't delete this just purely based on the fact that I never look at it. If it's something that is in your vision, then yes, you can delete it. Or if you literally do not care that this exists in any way, shape, or form, sure, you can also delete that. That's perfectly fine.
I had another question regarding this UI.
Mhm.
I love it, and I want something similar, right?
Mhm.
But the weak aura is my concern. Was that separate from the UI, or did that come with the UI?
This is part of the UI, but it is fully customizable as part of the UI.
So did you make any changes on it yourself, or did you just take it as it was?
Like I shifted a couple of things around just slightly. Like I shifted Sweeping Strikes and Colossus Smash. I moved these between positions. I added my pummel here. But otherwise, it's generally the same.
Okay. Because I kind of want to look for something for Rat Paladin that I feel like would be a little more. Because like I'm close to it, like with what I want, but it's not quite. And I feel like this looks way cleaner, and I kind of want something as well. So
yeah,
I really liked Atrocity for Ret Pally. It was really good.
So, in summary, have all the information most vital to you close to your screen. If it's not vital to you, get it away from the middle of your screen, such as damage meters, such as boss HP. You don't really need to know what the boss HP is. You obviously also have your plater for that. Make sure that you're not tracking anything that is non-vital near the middle of your screen. Make sure that you are having things which are related that are vital, which are already going to be in the middle of your screen, next to each other. For example, your health bar and your defensives should be next to each other. Same thing with externals and your raid frames if you're a healer. Same thing with healing CDs for a raid leader should be near your raid frames. So all of these things need to be quite centralized. Otherwise, the whole point of this is to reduce the amount that you're having to think. Because of this UI, I have to think less. Things that I need to see are automatically being seen, right? Like I don't have to think, oh, do I have an execute proc and look down here on base UI. I don't have to look right here. I just simply, boom, right there, I have an execute proc. Same thing, I don't have to look if I have, my defensives up. I don't have to look and see on top of the frame where my Colossus Smash is. Everything rotational is right in front of my face. Everything defensive is right in front of my face, right? That's the whole point. And I don't have to think as actively to be able to resolve things because I know where all of my information is. And it's consistent between spec to spec to spec. That's what creates a good UI, and that's why a good UI is important. So moving on from UI, and remember, we'll talk about sound cues in a little more depth in a bit. I'm also going to link a fantastic podcast done by the Potty Siege, Ratnos, Maximum, and Dorky, which has a large section on UI and why it's important. I would highly recommend you guys watching that. It is very enlightening. If you don't want to take my word for it, take their word for it. So now let's talk about the pyramid, or the layers of consistency. The pyramid is the foundational process of creating consistency. So first, the literal foundation of consistency is pattern creation. If you cannot create patterns, you cannot repeat. If you cannot repeat, you cannot be consistent. But to create patterns, you have to recognize them. Pattern recognition is almost as important as pattern creation in and of itself. If you do not have pattern recognition, then how can you utilize any of the patterns that you've created in your head? Then we have passive transposition. Does anyone have an idea of what passive transposition is?
Is that like when you move things from your working memory into your passive memory?
Exactly. So passive transposition is transferring the things that you are actively thinking about to passive. Then there's active reproduction. Active reproduction simply means that you are actively thinking about using the patterns. If you are not actively thinking about that at any point, then simply you will not be able to get consistent. And then at the top of the chain is flow. Anyone want to guess what flow is?
How your eyes go around the screen?
Sort of.
Kind of like
when all of
singing a
it
song or... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
when all of it comes together and you put it all into something and it goes boom, it just clicks. You know.
You don't really have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, I
have-
was gonna say it's kind of like singing like a favorite song. Like you don't really think about the words, you just do it.
Is
Exactly.
it like the? Okay, never mind.
Yeah. So flow can really be kind of appended to say flow. I don't know why that's so fucking chunky. My word. To say flow state. So this is whenever you are no longer thinking and it just happens. That's whenever you have built this pyramid. You've started down here. You've built your recognition. You have done your passive transposition and your active reproduction, and you have entered the flow state, and your pyramid is complete. You are now going to kill this fucking boss like a champ. So let's dive into each of these sections a little bit deeper. So first, pattern creation. There are really 3 parts of this. First, which we'll talk about in a minute, is scripting. Scripting, we referenced some with Tell, and he went through kind of the concepts behind scripting, why scripting is important. We're going to kind of deep dive into that and teach you how to form a script, as well as, once again, go through the foundational side of scripting. The next is pattern downloading. What pattern downloading means is taking the things which you have done previously. Let's say you did Mythic Jailer, or better yet, let's use Imperator Margok. So Imperator Margok back in Warlords of Draenor had a mechanic where he pushed out a circle from him. It would do damage to you as it passed through you, and it would slowly knock you back, and it would explode in a little radius around you and hit people near you. Does that sound like a mechanic that you guys have recently experienced?
It's Tempest Wing.
Yes, it is Tempest Wing on Razageth, literally copy and pasted. Blizzard has made a lot of bosses, and they kind of have a formulaic process as to how they're created. Because of that, you will commonly see mechanics which have existed before and previously been solved in new mechanics. There'll be a slight twist on it, but generally, they're the same thing. So between Imperator Margok, you had to download that pattern for the past 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, right? And then you get to Razageth and you're like, holy fuck, that's Imperator Margok. And you've already downloaded that pattern. Now you just activate it. There you go, done. It can be done in a smaller sample size, such as Amalgamation Chamber and Volcaros. You can have both of those, which are just 1 tier apart, and download the data of how you move between 2 different groups, how that pattern happens, how you have soaks onto different sides, etc. That whole concept is how you can use previous patterns and constantly improve. It's no longer you creating the pattern. You simply recognize, hey, this is like this boss. This is like this mechanic. Download that pattern and move on. Then there's pattern repetition and recognition. Some patterns truly are super repeatable. And as we said, recognizing those is super important. We'll get more into recognition whenever we go actually to the recognition stage, but let's go ahead and deep dive on scripting. So I got another pyramid for you. This is the pyramid of scripting. How do we build a script? We talked about this a little bit last week, on Sunday. The first thing you start with is your CD timings. Your CD timings are your foundational part of your entire pyramid, because without CD timings, how do you decide on your positioning? How do you decide on your defensives? Then, after you get your CD timings figured out, you move into positioning. After you get your positioning, you move into variable instancing. Does anyone know what variable instancing is?
My guess would be the things that change from pole to pole, like how shockwaves move or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. We'll dive into variable instancing a little more, but basically, variable instancing is the mechanics which you don't always get that change your script. So, like a soak on Volcaros, or a wave on Rashok. Then your defensives sit on top of that. After you have your CD timings, positioning, and variable instancing done, now you place your defensives relative to the amount of pressure you're feeling in different categories. Then we have a camera. We'll dive into why this is important, but camera positioning is actually vital to you remaining consistent. If your camera positioning is changing, your viewport of the game is changing, which means how can you possibly be consistent? Finally, at the top, we have detailing. What do you guys think detailing might entail?
Maybe just like the fine tuning of everything, like just the little things.
I would also add maybe like confirming with other people in your group in some way about like positioning and stuff, and like just double checking that everything's working correctly.
Yeah, so detailing essentially encompasses the end stages of your script, where you're trying to put in the very small, little tiny things that you can adjust. So maybe previously you were just using a utility spell. Let's say it's Heroic Leap. Whenever you felt you needed it. But now that you've gotten everything else down, you add in the detail that, hey, I'm going to Heroic Leap on the first Firestorm every time. Every single time, no matter what, at this exact second. Doesn't matter what's happening, I am Heroic Leaping here, right? Maybe it's a Dream Rend. Maybe you decide that you're going to use Heroic Leap on the Dream Rend every single time. But detailing is the final step that really brings everything together and creates a fully consistent pattern. Without one of these, they all fall apart. So let's dive into CD timings. There's a lot of ways that you can find your CD timings, but here's the general process that you should go through every single time. Out of raid, and before you get to a boss for the first time, very important, preparation is huge. Before you get to a boss and out of raid, first look at the top trusted logs of your spec on lorgs.io. So you then take that information you get on Lorgs and look at the logs of trusted players of your spec and apply critical thinking as to why the CDs are placed there. So just knowing where a CD is does not mean that's the best spot for it, and does not mean that you're done. You need to understand why the cooldown is there. If you don't understand why, how are you ever going to be able to make on-the-fly adjustments to your CD timing, or make adjustments to your CD timing before you even get to a boss based on your knowledge of why people are placing CDs in certain locations, right? If you've never used Lorgs.io, let's take a second and let's pop out of here. Lorgs.io is a great resource for not only healers, which it's more commonly used for, but tanks and DPS as well. Let's say that you are an Unholy DK. You would go over here and click on Unholy Death Knight, and you're trying to look at Farak. So you click on Mythic Farak, and you're trying to see, okay, I want to know when Army of the Dead is being used by all of these top logs. So simply, you can click off the 2 defensives right here. You can click off the 3 that you don't care about over here. And now we see, okay, they're using Army of the Dead right on this Flamefall at 313, right? Pretty much every single one of them is using it here. That's pretty blatant. Now, sometimes you'll get it to where things are a little bit less obvious. Things are being placed in differing spots. So for Unholy DK, it appears that most people have everything in the exact same spot. There's no question. Fantastic. That means that we can just pretty much copy these. We try and see exactly why they're placed in each of these individual spots. Once we understand that, now we submit these into our script. So you can also go through and let's say that you want to make sure that you actually have a player that you trust. So let's just take here Biceps Pump, because we know that Biceps Pump is a top level Unholy DK, and he is a trusted Unholy DK player. And we just want to double check exactly what he's doing on this boss, right? Is he doing boss damage? Yes, he is. So we want to make sure that we are actually checking and making sure that the damage being done is vital damage. It's not parse damage. So after we go through that process, and if you wanted to export it to MRT just so you have it in MRT, then you can do that. I wouldn't recommend that. That's a little bit like I'm really bad at the game level, but teach their own. Let's dive back in to what you do once you're in RAID. Once you're in RAID, you need to test those original CD positions. So the ones that you just found out of RAID by looking through the logs and looking through logs, now you need to move those to in RAID. So testing the original CD positions is really important because you need to know that your original CD positions and your script is going to work. That means that whenever you start progging the boss, you have your CDs in the kill position for the first few pulls to confirm that those CDs work there. Now, sometimes you need to move CDs to help in prog instead of having them in the kill positions just for certain instances. Let's take Farak as a fantastic example. Farak, maybe you realize that, hey, we're not breaking the intermission shield. You're not planning on using your CD on the intermission shield long term, but to get through and help us get through prog, you use it on the shield because you know that we're nowhere close to a kill. We just started progging intermission and we're not breaking the shield. Obviously, damage will be optimized in the intermission over time, so you can move your CD out of intermission whenever we get close to a kill, but for now, move it into intermission and get us through the phase. Prog is more important than placing your CDs where they will be in their kill positions. But keep in mind that you have to test your original CDs first. Do not move things until you have tested your original CDs. If we reach a point where we need more damage for prog, then move your CDs there and we will test your original CDs after the damage is optimized. For example, for rack intermission, let's say for the first 5 pulls, you moved your CDs to the rack intermission because we weren't breaking the shield. You tried to hold the first 2 pulls, then the next 3 pulls, you moved it because we weren't making it. Now we have another 5 pulls go by, and you've been using it on the intermission. But it seems like we're breaking it pretty easily now. Now move that back to your original CD position. If it causes an issue, make sure, hey, I moved my CD away. Should I just CD there instead? Ask that question. I'll let you know. I'm looking at our actual data constantly, and you guys will be able to know if it's actually important for me to have you CD on the shield or CD afterwards. The next super important part, top down, is confirm the damage is valuable damage. Just because you're top of the details meter or top of the logs doesn't mean shit. If your damage is not valuable damage, then it doesn't matter. What is valuable damage? Well, let's take Farak once again. We know that phase 1 boss damage doesn't fucking matter. It's useless. No one fucking cares. We know that phase 2 damage on the ads does not matter. The Screaming Souls entirely irrelevant. The Colossus are somewhat relevant as long as they're dying, but the instant they start dying and they're dying comfortably, damage no longer matters on the Colossus. Phase 2 boss damage, however, is extremely important. That is extremely valuable damage. Same with Phase 3. Phase 3 boss damage is extremely valuable because it allows us to skip the hardest parts of the fight. The same would apply to Tendril with the roots. Tendril, let's say that we're not optimizing things well, so you're going to put your CDs onto the roots at the beginning of prog so that we can kill them comfortably. Boss damage doesn't matter at that current moment in time. But as we get close to a kill, you should move as many CDs off of the roots as possible because boss damage is the only thing that matters. That's what valuable damage is. Then after you finish a raid, you need to compare your logs with those trusted players. Are you actually getting an effective CD cast off? Sometimes it's that those players simply are better than you, and that's okay. Let's say you're a caster and you have to plant really hard, and maybe you weren't pre-positioning correctly, or maybe your movement isn't as clean as these players where they're CDing. Maybe there's some fucking Giga Chad Demon Hunter who is pressing meta on the Greater Firestorm in P2 and he's getting full uptime, right? That's not you. You're not him. It's just accept that and move the CD elsewhere if you're not actually getting an effective cast. So after CD timings, we jump into positioning. Now, this is a big one. Positioning is the more complex topic because CD timings realistically are pretty easy to find and place where they need to go. But positioning is a much more wide and complex topic. But here's the process of creating your positional script inside of a fight. The first and foremost thing is shut the fuck up. What that means is stop moving. Stop it. Stop moving. How you should look at it is moving equals bad. Even if you're a melee, moving equals bad. Understood? Understood. That is your foundation. Every time you were thinking about your positional script, you were thinking, how can I move the least? So extra movement is not just a mistake, it is a huge mistake. It is a huge, huge mistake. It is almost as bad as dying because you know what it's going to do? It's going to make you die or other people die. The other thing is you just need to think, I'm trying to plant all the fucking time because that reduces your cognitive load. If you're just standing still, you'll realize how peaceful everything feels. Even if you're a melee, you just stand still and everything seems calm and relaxing. And you're just like, there's crazy fucking mechanics going on all around you and you're pumping the boss. And it's like, well, if I'm planting, then it just seems easy. A swirly didn't spawn on me. I'm not fucking moving. I'm just still sitting here pressing a global every second. It's calm. But we can't always be planted. We're trying that as our goal, right? Our base of creating our script is we're trying to plant as much as possible. We're trying to not move as much as possible. But there are mechanics, they do exist, and they're going to force you to move. So how do we adjust for mechanics? First things first, you need to pre-position. So while you're doing your rotation, inside of downtime, try to pre-position for the next mechanic that's going to happen. Let's say you're a destruction warlock who has to really plant and cast often. You need to move as you cast your instant casts, or simply just take the L and dash over, walk towards the edge of the firestorms before the firestorm is cast so that you are pre-positioned. Because in the long run, what does that allow you to do? Well, that allows you to plant. If you move all the way over to where the firestorms are going to happen, then if you don't get a firestorm, great, you don't fucking move. You just sit there. Now, it's important that whenever you're pre-positioning for a mechanic, you don't position inside of where the mechanic's going to go if you're a class which has to plant. So, for a Destruction Warlock, if you are moving for the firestorms, you make sure that you are not standing where the circle is going to overlap you if you don't get the firestorm. Why is that? Again, back to number one, you're trying to shut the fuck up. You're trying to quiet down your movement and plant. So you don't want to be positioned where you're going to be forced to move if you don't get the mechanic. So then there's active movement. Active movement mechanics are ones which force you to move. Let's think the Dream Rend on Farak, the Tempest Wing on Raszageth, the Storm Surge on Raszageth. Those are all examples of active movement. You are forced to move for those mechanics throughout the mechanic. You can adjust your CD timings, and you can adjust your global casts inside of those mechanics to better position yourself and lose less damage. So, one of the things with this idea of active movement is you actually want to script every piece of it. Active movement, let's say the Dream Rend on Farak. Every global is scripted. I cannot emphasize that enough. Every single global is scripted inside of active movement events. So every button you're pressing is the same every single time, no matter what. You get a proc, fuck it. That sucks. You keep going. Every single time. Now, if you were a better player, let's say I'm fired up, then sure, you can adjust based on procs. But otherwise, no. Every single time is the same because the movement in active movement is inherently difficult. That's what Blizzard designed it to be. It designed the movement to be hard. That's why it's an active movement ability. Use those same globals every time and try to move identically. These are the most important positional moments inside of any fight because your movement directly affects everyone else in the raid, such as on the Dream Rend. You have to do the same thing every time, no matter what, both rotationally, globally, and positionally. Then we come to kind of the overarching concept of positioning, which is scripted movement versus variable movement. What is scripted versus variable? So if we were to take this and write it on a chart, right? Let's take Volcaross, for example. We have instances of scripted movement, the meteor soaks that happen, right? So we know every time that the meteor soak is going to happen. It's on a timer. It happens every single time. We know we're going to have to move there for it. But then we have the variable movement instance of the debuff, right? You don't know exactly, if and when you're going to get a debuff. So this is an example of scripted on a timer, happens every time. You always have to move for this, and variable. How do we deal with that? So we'll go more into details on how to create this exact concept and utilize it. But the basis is, first, you're going to create an ideal plan. So if you got no mechanics the entire time, how would you move? It shouldn't be a lot. You should be trying to plant the entire time, right? You always want to plant. So you're creating this ideal scenario, still with pre-positioning in case you get the mechanic, right? Because that allows you to move less if you get the variable movement instance. But you're basing a script around the ideal scenario. Next, create a variable instance script. So a variable instance script, or VIS, is a situation where you are inserting a clip. If we imagine you're watching a YouTube video, right? And the YouTube video is your ideal script, right? Imagine that you're an editor of the YouTube video and it's like, fuck, I got the debuff, right? You would cut the video here and then you would clip it back here, and this is your variable, and you insert it, and then you're back to ideal. That's what you're creating with these VISs. That's the whole concept behind adjusting for mechanics and shutting the fuck up, is ideal versus VIS. Clipping in the VIS into your ideal. So after that, you need to think through how to create your ideal plan. 3-step process, really. How can I move the least and still do mechanics? How can I pre-position the best during downtime to prevent further movement? How can I effectively return to my script after variable instancing? Those are the questions you need to ask. So let's keep going here. Let's talk about variable instancing. So you create the script when you don't get any mechanics, your ideal script. You create a script for each mechanic you might get, the variable instance script. You then insert the variable instance script into your ideal script. Then you return to your ideal script after the variable instance is over. Let's look at an example of this. So I'm going to take us out here over to Warcraft Recorder. Let's look at, again, Volcaross, because I think Volcaross is a great example of this. So here is our Mythic Volcaross kill. And I'm going to play this on 2x speed. And if we look at my movement here, sometimes I get a little bit of Parkinson's, right? But generally, you can see I'm moving very little. Occasionally, I do APM spam where I press AD just a tad. But most of the time, I'm kind of standing right in the center. I don't get the debuff here. Okay, fantastic. I'm still in my ideal script. I don't fucking move. Then I see the tail pop up. Okay, I move to the left because I'm not in the tail. I could plant there, but I'm worried about the waves which come out afterwards. The waves come out. I move the least amount I possibly can to get out of that wave, right? That is a variable movement instance right there. The wave happened. I had to move to the left. The wave came, I noticed gap right here, that's the quickest to get back to my ideal script, and I transfer myself back into my ideal script. Boom, not moving anymore. Now I shift slightly in between globals so that I can get inside of the soak. And then swirly, and I'm not moving. Tail happens, variable movement instance. Once again, I move out to the right. Why? Because I'm prepared to soak this, right? Then I dodge the wave the smallest distance I can. I'm watching this soak. I'm thinking, okay, Tellery's not walking towards us, so Tellery is most likely going to use Netherwalk. She doesn't, so I decide to hop in, and again, not moving. I transfer over to the other side. Why would I do that? Well, I know that, okay, yes, Alec is going to be over here, but I noticed only one soak spawned on this side. So I know there's a third soak on this side. The other thing I know which is coming is the big soak, which I know is going to be in the center right here. So I'm pre-positioning myself so that I have to move as little as possible whenever going into that big soak. We see that exact thing play out. I end up not getting into a soak here, but I'm moving very little. Variable movement instance happens there, and scripted. I make sure I position myself in the front of this soak so that I don't get knocked back out of melee range so that I have the least movement possible whenever we start again. And here's a great instance of how the group, you guys, need to change your movement. If we look at this and we see, okay, who gets these debuffs? Tellery gets the debuff, right? And there's someone behind me that you can't see. Also, notice that I'm pretty much in top-down camera the entire fucking time. That's one thing that we'll get into a little bit later. But we see that Tellery gets the debuff. Okay, our script as a raid, our strategy script should tell you the debuff leaves, the raid stays. The debuff leaves, the raid stays. So you, if you don't get the debuff, you don't fucking move. Stop moving. Don't move. If you do get the debuff, you move the fuck out. You go to the right, you go to the left, depending on which side you are. Here, Tellery does exactly that. The raid does not move. Perfect. Love it. Tellery goes out to the side because she doesn't want to communicate vocally because she's a loser, but does press Netherwalk. Then variable movement instance, back to the left. But here, we had a little bit of confusion. Why did we have a little bit of confusion? Well, because Alec gets the debuff here, right? And we're dodging at the same exact time. Light gets the debuff back here. And there's a little bit of confusion because people don't know which way are these debuffs going to go. They should go to the right. We've scripted this. This is a scripted variable instance. Every time you get it, you should go to the right to make it consistent, right? To be repeatable. And the raid should move to the left. But what happens here? Well, Alec takes a second, starts moving to the left, then starts moving forward to try and get out of people, then starts moving to the left again to try to hallway fire raid, and then finally starts moving out to the right.
What the fuck, Alec?
The same thing happens behind me, actually, where Light moves out to the left. I know you can't see it on this, but he moved left, forcing the other people to move to the right. That is not how that should have happened. It should have been consistent every single time. The debuffs move out, the debuffs move back in, the raid stays. That's how you use variable instancing. Any questions, comments, concerns on that? Fantastic.
Actually, I did kind of want to talk about this a little bit because we had our issues with Lardar last night.
Mm-hmm.
The scripting of the entire raid matters in those instances because you can't really script on your own when everybody has the debuff. What do you recommend for situations like that where people are moving around like maniacs?
So that's
Learn to stutter step.
That's a strategy thing. And generally, the strategy for us is withheld in the general practices section for active movement. That would be an active movement scenario, right? For active movement things such as that, that's held within raid strategies. And then you need to make sure that you are adapting to that strategy script, right? That's how those mechanics would be handled. And if people are fucking that up, well, then it's on them, not you. Because if you start adjusting your script because people are fucking it up, then we're never going to get consistent. If a script kills you, make sure that it's actually the script's fault and not someone else's. This is an instance where other people are going to mess up. It's not a bad thing. It's just natural. And it's a learning opportunity. But it doesn't mean that you need to change your script if they kill you by messing up. For example, Alec there, moving to the left instead of the right and hallwaying fire raid, right? C-Raid shouldn't change his script because Alec did that. He just is like, oh, it's okay. Alec moved to the left instead of the right. That's fine. I keep doing my script and we'll talk about it afterwards. So that's a good example of how you can look at those instances of active movement. All right.
Wait, can you clarify that? Are you saying that we should or should we not adapt to other people's mistakes?
So you should adapt to other people's mistakes, but not change your script because of it. Like, obviously, if Alec runs to the left, you don't want to just like be like, okay, well, my script says I stay here no matter what, so I'm just going to eat it. What you would do is in that pull, you would do another variable instance script. So people fucking up creates a variable instance, right? So you would just insert a variable instance there. You would move to the right instead, and then you would move back left. And then the most important thing is after the pull, say, hey, why did this happen? This is not how this is supposed to happen. I had to change my script. That's not what's supposed to happen, right? We need to talk about it so that Alec, I guarantee you 100%, Alec's not fucking stupid. He just didn't know. Like, that's it. He was not thinking about it, right?
I just wanted to get through the lava pool as soon as possible.
Yeah.
That was why.
So it's just if we talk about it, then we can fix that. What I'm saying is you adapt in that pool, but you don't change your script permanently based on that pool.
Got it.
All right. Now let's talk about defensives. I've chatted a little bit about defensives with you guys a couple of times, but here's where we're really going to hammer this down. And we also talked about this with Tell. How do you script the defensive? Well, there are 4 types of defensive usage. There's healing pressure defensive, there is mechanical pressure, positional pressure, and then there's oh fuck, right? How you should script your defensives is leave one button, just one, for the oh fuck, right? You have one button that like, okay, I fucked up here. I got hit by 2, I'm about to get hit by 2 frontals on Farak. Pop the oh fuck defensive. Otherwise, for every other defensive other than that one, and it's the same one permanently, you pick one for your spec. For example, Warrior, you could pick Die by the Sword. That's your oh fuck button, right? So otherwise, every other defensive is scripted into 1, 2, and 3. A healing pressure defensive, a mechanical pressure defensive, or a positional pressure defensive. What are each of these things? A healing pressure defensive is kind of what you would normally think. If we look at a fight like Farak, right, where there is a lot of damage, just rot damage pulsing in the intermission, and you notice people are getting really low in the intermission all the time, how does a healer's fucking brain work, right? A healer's brain is going to take this, okay, and they're going to look at this frame. And what do you think a healer's looking at right now? If everyone was, in the same spot. They immediately look at Xenon. Why are they looking at Xenon? Because he's the lowest person. That's how a healer's brain works. They're not actually recognizing that Xenon. They just see bar empty, me heal. Ay. So how do we use defensives to offset healing pressure? Basically, you are making healers not have to look at you. So if you're not gonna die, you're not gonna die. You're a plate wearer, you're a rep paladin, right? Or you're a warlock. You're not gonna fucking die. You're fine. But if your HP is down here and you're a warlock, you know that you're safe. The healer doesn't. The healer has no idea. They might be a fucking god and they're tracking every single defensive on their frames and somehow have the time to process that between pressing the global. But I guarantee there might be 2 healers on the fucking planet that do that. Otherwise, they see your health down here. They don't care that you're a warlock. You're going to get healed. Which means suddenly, if this warlock and this hunter are at the same HP, then both of you are equal in their mind. Maybe the hunter's slightly higher just because they think hunter, right? But generally, you're equal in their mind, even though Xenon is in grave danger and Short Pots is perfectly fine, right? So
I will add as well, just for the sake of this, it's not always about the healer's mind. There's also a lot of smart healing in this game.
Yes, also true. A lot of heals go to the lowest HP target. So short pots may know that he's safe, but you need a way to let the healers know you're safe. And part of that is using a defensive to take off the healing pressure. If Short Pots was to press Dark Pact, even though he knows 100%, no shadow of a doubt, that he is not going to die, Short Pots knows that. If he just presses Dark Pact, then suddenly they're no longer looking at him and they're just looking at Xenon, who is in grave danger. So you can save other people by simply pressing a defensive, even when you don't need it, to offset the healing pressure. The same applies for mechanical pressure.
Can I ask a question regarding that? Because I'm not sure about other classes, but one of the weird thing with Shadow Praise, well, Praise in general, the Desperate Prayers, it doesn't really change the percentage. Like, if you look at the bar, it doesn't change anything. Because what it does is it just add the maximum health to that, and then heal the same portion of to your health. So what I mean is, if you look at the health bar, it doesn't change anything, even though you are like 25% more health.
Right.
How does that work?
Don't healers have like a glow when people use defensives and shit?
Yeah, so healers would, one, be able to tell that you have Desperate Prayer active, but two, it actually would change the overall bar, because most mechanics in the game are based on a raw number rather than a percentage value. So if you gain 15% max HP, suddenly you're going to be at 70% HP instead of 60% HP from a specific mechanic, right? So it still works in the same way.
So the healer can see that the Desperate Prayer is activate?
Yes. So then we come to mechanical pressure. What is mechanical pressure? What do you guys think?
Just mechanics to do a lot of damage, so use a defensive to offset the damage. Or things like Dream Rend, where like there's heavy movement because of a mechanic, and like you're using it proactively to not take a lot of damage while dealing with the mechanic.
Or maybe like you're going into a soak and you're not completely topped off and you have something to spare, so you don't die.
Sort of. Let's let me
Using
pull
damage
up
reduction
something
before
here.
a damage event.
Is it like the blaze
I'm gonna go
lands?
with,
Is it
like-
like you popping a defensive during the blaze lands because there's a lot and you just eat it? With
I'm
a
gonna go with
defensive?
yeah, like immunities and stuff to like take care of mechanics, so you don't have to worry about it.
So that's a really obvious example. Like using Spell Bop on a Disc Priest so they don't have to worry about mechanics, right?
Ev, are you there?
This is an example of a defensive that I'm using. This is twofold, right? I'm pressing Astral Shift here. I know I'm not going to die. There's zero chance I die here, right? But this Astral Shift lasts 11 seconds. So I'm pressing Astral Shift, and that's because, and I press AG, because I know, okay, I am not going to die to this, but I want to keep myself healthy in case someone else does, and then I know immediately following this is a Frontal Blaze combo. And if I press Astral Shift, if I get suddenly hit by 2 or 3 blazes, I will still live, or 2 or 3 frontals, I will still live. So I press Astral Shift here every single time because I know it takes off the mechanical pressure from me to dodge. I could literally plant and eat almost everything here because I pressed Astral Shift. But here, and you see that Astral Shift is perfectly timed to where after all of that happens, boom, Astral Shift is gone. So I would say that is a literal perfect defensive script. You offset healing pressure at the offset. So right here, I'm offsetting healing pressure. And then immediately, the main reasoning behind this script position, the first reasoning, was to use it here for the Blaze frontal combo so that I did not have to worry about getting hit by anything, right? And if I got hit by something, then I would be perfectly fine. That's how you offset mechanical pressure. You're no longer having to worry about dodging because, well, you have a defensive active, and you can just continue to pump. The same applies for detailing, right? An example of detailing is my original thought process behind placing it here was, placing it back over here. I actually had it like 5 seconds later than this because I was using it whenever this timer was down, purely based off the fact that I knew that I needed to use a defensive during that space to take off mechanical pressure. But then detailing allowed me to realize, hey, if I use my Astral Shift right on the soak, then it'll take off healing pressure, and it's actually fully active throughout the entirety of the Frontal Blaze combo. That's an example of detailing. So I gained an extra effective version of this defensive usage. I also realized that my Astral or my AG would sync up with my Astral Shift if I pressed it at the end of the soak, and then it would heal people who were low going into the Breath Blaze combo, the Frontal Blaze combo, which means that they may live multiple instead of just living one. That's offsetting mechanical pressure because it's offsetting the need for you to dodge, right? So then we have positional pressure. You may think, wait a second, is positional not the same as mechanical? No, not really. So positional pressure is different from mechanical because positional pressure is back to what we just talked about. Your positional script, right? Well, let's say you find a really difficult instance of positioning. You find that, hey, it is very tough for me to get over to this spot and feel safe. Again, Farak, great example, after the second Dream Rend, whenever you get that Blaze. That positionally is very challenging to move to the safe spot because it's so far away. If you're a class with less mobility, you can offset that positional pressure by just saying, hey, I'm going to eat the Blaze, right? I'm just going to be in a much harder spot for me to dodge because positionally it's too difficult for me to maintain my planting if I'm moving over there. So you decide, I'm going to press Dark Pact. I'm going to press whatever defensive you want. And you're not going to move to the other side to allow yourself to position in a more effective spot for your spec. Yes, did you lose a defensive? Sure. But now that means that you are able to stay in the same spot and not have to move as frequently. Then you have oh fuck. And we all know what oh fuck is, but a lot of you are really bad at this, even though that's probably what a lot of you think of defensives as anyways, is oh fuck buttons. A lot of you I will watch so often. You're sitting here, and this is your health bar, right? And it's at full HP. You're 100%. And then suddenly, you drop down to a mechanic happens, and you're at 5% HP. Oh, fuck, right? You press your defensive. Boom. But there's no damage coming for the next 20 seconds. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you press your defensive? But on top of that, if you were going to go down to 5% HP, fucking press it before it happens. Because if you press it before it happens, now instead of pressing oh fuck at 5%, now you look like this, where you're pressing oh fuck at 55%, right? Like you pressed your oh fuck here because you realized, hey, this is going to fucking hurt. And then boom, you're 55% HP and you're never even in remote danger. And again, this offsets the healers because they're able to look at the guy who's retarded and pressed it after the fact instead of you who pressed it beforehand. So you have to use your defensives, one, before the big damage event. So again, if you're going into the Farak Soak and you're at 80%, right? You want to go ahead and press the defensive instead of pressing it after the Farak Soak, where now you're suddenly sitting at 3%, right? But a lot of you do this. A lot of you do. It's not good. The same thing with healer externals, by the way. Same exact concept. You don't safety bubble someone who just dropped to like 20% HP. Most of the time, there's no damage happening afterwards. Maybe there is, and sometimes it's fine to go ahead and plop it on them. But ideally, before the damage instance happens, you recognize, hey, this warrior is at, like 70% HP before this mechanic happens. I'm going to safety bubble him, and then he ends that at, 50% instead of 20%, and he's never in danger of dying. So this is how you need to use oh fuck defensives. Not this way. This is how a lot of you do it, but you need to use it either before the damage instance happens, recognize you're in danger, press the DR beforehand, or not use it at all. A great example of not use it at all is Rashok slams, right? So on a Rashok, he slams the ground and you go down to like 10% HP, but you're absolutely piss vibing. You know why? Because there's no damage. Nothing. There's nothing that happens after that for like 20 fucking seconds. You're just sitting there, let the healers heal you up. You're vibing. So understand the damage profile of the fight. A lot of fights do this, where it's just big ass spikes of damage. If you're inside of these troughs, you don't need to worry about your health being at 10%, 95% of the time. If there's a global rot, Farak is a good example of this, where he constantly is rotting the raid's HP. 5% HP is always scary because of the global rot. So then it's back to this concept. Press before and stay at a healthy percentage.
Okay, so I have a kind of a silly question.
Mhm.
Health pots and health stones count as defensives, right? Because as a healing pressure defensive, I press blur. As a mechanical pressure defensive, I press blur. And as a positional pressure defensive, you're not going to believe this, but I press blur.
Right.
So that's like the only thing I have.
So yes, health stones and health pots count as defensives, but always keep in mind that there are two different types of defensives, right? There's the healing ones, which are reactive, and then there's the DRs, which are proactive. You want to make sure that for any mechanic which is scarier, so we'll take Rashok slams, right? Rashok slams, you always want to DR, not heal. Because the likelihood is healing is always worse. That's why Exil from BM Hunter is considered such dog shit, right? It's because it doesn't actually save you most of the time as much as it just keeps you a little healthier. So most of the time you're going into a mechanic and you're at like, 80% HP. The only way health pot saves you is, again, use it beforehand and try to go up to, like 90%, right? But then you pressed health pot, you gain 10% HP, but you still fucking die because you have no DR. So Healthstone and health pot are still defensives, and any heal is still a defensive. But keep in mind that for any large hitting mechanic like this, you pretty much want to DR it. For any rot damage mechanic, so intermission on Farak, health pot, Healthstone, fucking fantastic there, right?
Okay, got it.
So big hits, DRs generally, Healthstone, health pot before the big hit happens if you think you're going to die. Otherwise, rot damage, that's where you should place your Healthstone, health pots.
How important do you think it would be for somebody to learn, like, when and how to use the Withering Health Potion?
Withering Health Potion, it's pretty much the same concept, except Withering Health Potion instead of what we said with, the DR thing. It's Withering Health Potion is so strong that, like, you'll be down here, right? And it'll bring you all the way up to, like, 90%. And the way that you think about that differently is you still need to press it before the damage instance happens. But since it's going to bring you to 100% HP, you can almost think of it like a DR. So, like, you would press a DR before the damage instance happens. But you can now use Withering. The bonus of Withering is you can use it on a big damage instance because, like, you'll be at 100% for it instead of, at 20 or 30 or 50. And then you get the rot afterwards, but you're just so much healthier in general than you would have been if you ate it here. Withering should be used like a DR to save your life, generally, for one-shot mechanics.
Okay, so you do think it's a good thing to learn and have in your repertoire, though?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Especially for specs that have less defensives overall. All right, moving on from defensives. We have camera. You guys have maybe never thought about this. I would bet likely over 50% of you have never thought about this. Scripting your camera movement. A lot of players struggle whenever things go wrong in a pool. If you're sitting there thinking, yeah, it's pretty hard. Whenever things get chaotic, whenever things are fucked, right? Let's say ads get turned on for rack and we're having to somehow knock them in, or one person misses their knock and someone else has to knock them in, and then it's late and then it doesn't get caught in the grip. And you think of those situations as stressful or difficult. A lot of that is rooted in your camera movement. Camera movement creates the foundation for adaptability pool to pool. If something goes wrong, your camera is what allows you to fix things. And on top of that, if you change your camera movement even slightly, pool to pool, it is absolutely impossible to maintain consistency because your view on the game is entirely different. I would like to reference a clip here from Mirez. So Mirez scripts his camera movement, obviously, because he's good at the game. Okay? And he has everything scripted down to a T here. He sees L1. You see him turn his camera to the side, right? Then, right before the next orbs come, he turns his camera like this as he's still hitting the boss. Gets in line of the orb, then he faces back. Does the same exact thing again. Orb is coming, he turns around, faces into the orb, absorbs the orb, and then keeps going, right? Not only that, you might think that's an obvious instance. Oh, of course you would fucking script your camera during the Farak intermission, but he does it everywhere. Here, he purposefully keeps his camera pointing towards where these ads are spawning so that he can see, hey, we're going to be moving the boss over towards Star, right? Because that's where it's going to be easier for the blaze dodges. Right whenever he moves back over here, he intentionally keeps his camera flipped and puts it back this way so that he can call out whenever there are issues with the blaze. The same applies whenever he gets the 2 ads here. He knows that the next thing that he needs to go and do after making sure those blazes are safe is grip the ads off on the side. So while he's DPSing these down, he keeps his camera in a top-down position to watch the cages, because again, Mirez is raid leading here. And then he starts to position himself to be able to look off to the side, not only for blazes and these ads, but also so that he can consistently pull these in. You see how he keeps his camera facing towards the front so that he can be watching these ads right here. Every single camera movement is scripted. Everything. If you watch Mirez, and I've watched him kill this boss so many times, it is absurd how identical every pull is, positionally, rotationally, defensively, and with his camera movement. That is a core part of building consistency. Without the camera movement, you cannot have a effective, consistent foundation to build off of. And without camera movement, you cannot be adaptable based on what happens or what goes wrong inside of the pool, because it's way more difficult for you to understand where you were inside of your script because your viewport is different, and now you lost the consistent basis of your script.
2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with casters that you must face your target in order to cast a spell? And then the second question is how do you deal with again, I do not know other classes, but for Priest there are so many skills that will always change your camera whenever you cast a spell.
So 2 things there. The always change your camera angle is actually a setting in the game. You can click to never adjust camera.
I tried that, it doesn't work.
Mm.
Always change your angle. It is really like crazy frustrating, annoying, because it not only it changes your camera movement, it also changes the direction that you're walking towards. There's so many times that I was trying to dodge something, I was walking, say, to the front, and then I accidentally press my spells, and then next thing I'm turning to the right. Or
Quizzy, is that true?
It
The
is
only spells are
really
really
annoying. And I'm pretty sure
like
Queasy
channel
also
ones.
do that.
Oh,
Yeah,
channeled
channels will
spells.
do it.
Yeah, it's just channel
Just
spells.
gotta hold down right click.
I hold
Disintegrate
down
doesn't
right
do
click
Gotta
it.
lock your
all the
camera.
time, and then I turn my mouse, like I can turn around with left click too while casting.
Yes, I was
If you're
gonna
holding
say.
right click, it doesn't let you do it. But if you're just holding left click, it does.
Yeah, so you can turn your camera independent of where your character's facing by holding down left click. Like Melee has to face the boss too, right? But Mirez was hitting the boss there because he just held down left click, flipped his camera around, and he's still facing the boss with his character. His camera's just flipped the other direction. Left click turns just your camera, right click turns both your camera and your character. But with channeled spells, yes. I mean, channeled spells will always face you towards the target, as well as the rotation of your character will change towards your target. But you can hold down left click to fight the channeled spell, and if you're holding down left click, same thing will apply where you'll keep channeling and you can turn your camera around independently. All good?
I'm just testing it out.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. So holding left click, it doesn't change my camera angle, but it changed my character's where my character is facing.
That seems like a setting. My
Do
left
you
click
have like
is
inverse
the other
left
way.
click, right click? Like, when you left click your desktop, does it pull up the context menu?
Yeah, this is really annoying.
We can look at it afterwards to try and figure out what's
Yeah.
going on there. All right. And finally, detailing. So as your script is getting closer to completed, which generally on a hard boss like Farak should be around 50 pulls. Obviously, it won't be completed for the last couple sections of the fight because you wouldn't have gotten there. But as it gets closer to completed, you want to add in the small details to assist you, and that's what completes the script. Now, small details to assist you would include small micro movements, using utility spells in certain slots, changing the exact timing of your CDs and your defensives to better line up with mechanics. Very small details to make sure that you're actually getting the most out of your script. Then we move into the flow. And flow with script is where you're no longer thinking about it. What did we just do, right? We just created a pattern. By going through all of that process, we have now created a pattern. Now, we have to go through the other steps, sure, which is we have to recognize patterns that as they appear so that we can use the pattern that we just created. The script that we just created relies on us recognizing when to use it. Then we can use passive transposition to turn our script from active to passive. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we are actively reproducing our script. And then you enter the flow state. Let's talk a little bit more about recognition. So recognition simply is the recognition of patterns. But that doesn't just reference a single boss where you create a script at the beginning of Prog, but also whenever you first come to bosses and referencing old bosses way back when. Imperator Margok Razageth, right? Common WoW patterns are important. So knowing the terminology behind things is extremely important for common WoW patterns. Because if you know the terminology, whenever you hear Meteor Soak, that should mean something to you. Your raid leader, if you know the terminology, you won't even have to look up a boss because you'll hear Meteor Soak, Amau Bomb, and you'll know exactly what to do with that mechanic. But if you don't know what that means, then you're in trouble, right? So I want to once again, I know there's some new people here, but there is, inside of Raid Strategies, a pinned post, which is called General Practices. This General Practices tab is what possesses a lot of the vocabulary. Armageddon Soak, a soak in which one person soaks, which wipes us if missed. A Meteor Soak, a large raid soak which needs to be soaked by most or all of the raid. Bomb, a debuff that explodes after a duration or dispel. Amalgamation Bomb, a bomb after exploding shoots projectiles or tornadoes out from the player. This will be updated to include a little bit more vocabulary, as I know a few of you were confused on some of the things that I was saying. This also includes consistencies that we have throughout the raid to make sure that we are not going to have problems with certain mechanics. For example, one big one is we will always move clockwise, unless otherwise stated. Those are examples of things inside of the general practices that you should have already had. Now, when it comes to those common WoW patterns, you need to recognize new patterns that reference old ones. Talking similar mechanics here. Smolderon. What's a mechanic on Smolderon that's similar to something you saw in Aberrus?
The NATOs are kind of
Tornadoes.
the ones on Amalgamation Chamber.
Yeah.
Bomb NATO, I guess you would say.
So the tornadoes are very similar to both the Amalgamation tornadoes as well as the shockwaves. They feel very similar, right? What's another thing on Smolderon that you have seen before?
Group soak.
The intermission is kind of like Rockshock intermission too, actually.
So the group soak is another one. That would be called a meteor soak or a group soak. The other thing, which Light mentioned for the wrong reasons, it does kind of feel like the Rashok intermission, but the Smolderon intermission, in case you don't know, you'd have to be old to know this, is actually an exact duplicate of Heroic Ragnaros from Firelands. World in Flames is the same ability. It's even called the same thing. That mechanic is identical. So these are ways that you can reference old patterns. You know the Meteor Soak, okay, I know what to do with that, right? You know the Amalgamation Bomb, you know what to do with that. So seeing those patterns or seeing things on simpler bosses like Volcaros is how these Race to World first guilds. They come in, they didn't look at Gnarlroot, Volcaros, Agara at fucking all, right? Their raiders come in, they got no idea what's going on. They walk in there, they kill it in one pull. Why do they do that? Because they recognize the patterns at an extremely high level to where immediately upon seeing a mechanic, boom, I know what the fuck's going on, right? Like the add mechanic with the bombs on Gnarlroot. Seen that one before, easy. Know what's going on. The intermission on Gnarlroot. Seen that one before, know what's going on. The spears on Agara. Seen that one before, know what's going on. You just have to identify the foundation of those mechanics. Whenever you identify the foundation of those mechanics, that allows you to create a pattern. And then that pattern references your old script that you used to use. So you can take that and you can use variable instancing. So you create an ideal script, right? So your ideal script was this. And then you noticed, hey, there's an old pattern that I recognize here. Boom, create a variable instance of that old pattern and insert it in. Old pattern, right? That's your old pattern right there. And it is overpowered. So you take that old pattern and you have mastered this mechanic within one pull because you recognize the pattern through using critical thinking of a previous pattern you've seen. This is mastered. It is done. You literally have a script that has hundreds of pools of practice. Just bam, insert it in. That's why it's also important to remember your scripts, at least in some capacity. So apply that variable instancing and insert that old pattern. The same thing whenever a mechanic is super similar, but it's just a bit different. So you can alternate your patterns inside of your known pattern. What does that mean? So instead of just taking this, right, we'd instead come down here and we would take our variable instancing pattern, right? So we know that we have that old pattern, okay? This is our old pattern right here. But there's a difference in this mechanic. So we cut out this section and we create a variable instance pattern right here. And then we restart our old pattern because this is the difference in the mechanic. It's super similar, except this one thing. Great example again, Smolderon intermission. So you take the old pattern you learned from Heroic Ragnaros and Firelands all that time ago, then you soak your balls right here, Love and Balls, and then boom, straight back to your Heroic Firelands pattern. This is how you can take a script and truncate it into your ideal script, right? So these are both your ideals, and then you truncated in both your old patterns, and then inside of that, you inserted a variable instance pattern for the new version or the alternate version of this similar mechanic which you just found, right? So taking that, let's also keep in mind, this seems really complex and really abstract, right? But it's not if you visualize. If you sit there and you're, staring at the ceiling because you're lonely and you don't have anyone to love you, like, you're staring off here in bed, then you can sit there and be like, let me think about Volcaros, right? And you're thinking through it and you're like, holy fuck, hold on a second. That's just like this, right? That's the same thing. I can just put I've been doing this the whole time, but now I can suddenly just change how I do the tail slam. Oh my God, that makes so much sense. That's how you get to these realizations. You visualize. And just to be clear, what is visualization? That's literally sitting there and thinking in your head, you start the pull. Like literally you're just going through the pool in your head. This is your brain, right? You're laying down and then you're just like, okay, pull timer, 10, 9, 8. And then you pull, you're doing your opener, you do your small movement here that you need to do. Then you come back and you soak and then you do your variable instance, right? And then you come back from your variable instance. So that is exactly how you realize these things in a fast-paced environment. I know that this is quite high-level stuff. Are there any questions about this?
Do you ever write down your scripts?
Sometimes. It's more of, I don't necessarily write it down, like actually written down, as much as I just like have general notes on things. Like maybe I have like whenever I was looking through and watching a VOD of myself, I write down like, okay, this movement was bad. Like, and then I have like, what the correct movement would be. Same thing for defensives. I have, this defensive should be shifted back. Defensive at, end of meteor soak, right? So I don't necessarily write down the whole script like step by step, although you very well could if you wanted to, if that helps you. But I just kind of write down some bullet points whenever I'm reviewing, and then if I ever don't remember, then I can just quickly reference back to those bullet points that I wrote out at a random time.
I do kind of have I don't know how to explain exactly, but say like you have a script and eventually somewhere down the line, like through prog, it ends up like clashing with someone else's script. Is that just like a communication thing and then you can change it from there? Because I mean, obviously you don't want to change it on everyone without them knowing, right?
Right. You would have to communicate that between whoever is causing the issue, or generally just communicate with the raid leader, and we can figure out who needs to adjust their script. Because there will be times where you create a script and it's actually wrong. You need to adapt that script to something new so that you can more effectively use things.
That's a good way to say, like, how do you know that your script is correct for everyone else too?
Generally, the best way to do that is just ask. Like, just be like, hey, I'm doing this, right? I'm CDing here, or I'm moving here. Is that okay? Like, just ask if you're confused about a certain thing, or a huge thing with gaming in general, and just anything that you're trying to learn, is feel. If something feels wrong, say something about it. Because that's all of your experience. Your brain is trying to tell you, wee woo, wee woo, wee woo, right? Like something is wrong here. If you use feels where something felt uncomfortable or something felt wrong, immediately say, hey, that didn't feel right. And then we'll quickly go back, we'll look at the VOD. Like we'll pull up the VOD and we'll see, okay, why didn't that feel right? And then you look at it and you say, okay, well, it was because, short pots ran onto me or ran too close to me with a seed, right? And that scared me. And then he got a blaze and then it was weird and it felt scary. And so then we analyze, okay, well then either you or short pots needs to just move over here, right? Or you need to go this way, So
Yeah.
use the feeling and then communicate and just ask.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. So now let's talk about passive transposition. So let's quickly reference lessons from episode 1. Why we did this in this order is it's important that everything we're talking about now is based upon what we talked about previously. You need to do this through deliberate practice in and out of the game. You have to target specific things, a small thing that has a short-term goal to actually reach a perfect script, to actually reach improvement. If you do not do that, your active will never become passive. You want to complete the goal that you set, the short-term goal, before continuing. And that's whenever we're talking about active reproduction, right? You're actively reproducing your script by putting it front of your mind and then pushing that through until you complete the script multiple times perfectly. Then you confirm after moving that active reproduction to passive through passive transposition that you did not lose any expertise or any, throughput or survivability or anything when moving towards your next goal, whatever that may be. Moving away from your current cognitive load to a different ratio for your specific use case. That makes sense. Great. Now, let's talk just a bit about active reproduction. This is what's actually happening in your brain whenever we're progging a boss. The top of your mind and taking up majority of your cognitive load, way more than your rotation, way more than everything else, is creating your script and executing your script. In the pool, you are executing your script. That is the front of your mind, the top of your mind. Who fucking cares about your damage? Who fucking cares about anything else? Execute your script. In between pools, you are adjusting and creating your script. So, very quickly, you are in pool. I am doing my script. I am doing my script. I am doing my script. That's it. Then, out of pool, okay, what felt wrong? What can I adjust? What can I move, right? So that's what you need to be thinking about while you're in RAID. None of this matters if you do not utilize active reproduction of your script, because you'll never be able to improve it on a consistent basis, or you'll never be able to actually consistently do your script on a passive level. The other thing is deviations should be looked at as a mistake. Now, you have to apply some critical thinking to that, right? Because if you deviate from your script, was it because of somebody else making a mistake? Was it because of you making a mistake? Is it a learning point because you made a mistake? Or do you actually need to adjust your script, right? So if you need to adjust your script, then that's okay. That happens from time to time. But if somebody just made a mistake that forced you to change for that specific instance, that's fine as well. Keep your script. You can use it as a learning point. You can say, hey man, I realized that you moved right instead of left. Or you can whisper me and say, hey, I noticed this, right? And we can fix that. And it's an opportunity for learn. That's a learning point. The other thing you need to do in active reproduction, you keep it top of your mind. Any deviation is seen as a mistake. Add some critical thinking to that. Then you need to repeat. You have to do your script multiple times before you try step 4, which is transposition. You cannot try to move active reproduction to passive if You have not done it multiple times. How many times? It depends on the player. You can try, you have to do some experimenting with by yourself. Let's say that you are someone who just started with this whole concept, most of you. Then you need to sit there and repeat it. Say, okay, I've now done this out of the past 10 pulls. I did it 8 times perfectly. I think I'm ready to transpose, right? You move that to passive thinking. You do 2 pulls with it being passive. Then you review the VOD and check, okay, was I effective whenever I was doing it? Yay, no, maybe so. Okay, then you decide, okay, maybe I need a little bit more than 8 out of 10. Or maybe I need a little bit less than 8 out of 10. And you find where the line is for you. But you need to confirm that you're not losing a part of your script whenever you swap. Be it your camera, the details you added, your CD timings, your positioning, whatever it may be. One other important thing with this is whenever you start a raid day, especially since we raid Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? Whenever it loops all the way back around to Tuesday, then you need to make sure that you are at the start of that raid using active reproduction to knock off the rust. Use a couple of pulls, maybe 1, 2, 3 pulls of active reproduction, even if previously it was passive, to recuperate your script. All good?
I have one question about like a fight like Lairdar, where positioning and movement seems like pretty inconsistent. I don't know if that's just like a mechanical problem for us, but like as a low mobility class in instances like that, I find it really hard to like adjust, and I just get really behind. So like, what is the best kind of process, I guess, that you would take to script that in a way that fits within the extreme variability that sometimes happens in like that fight?
So like Lairdar, for example, is a pretty much fully scripted fight. There is almost no RNG at all on Lairdar. So it feeling uncomfortable for you is an issue both with the raid script and your script individually, right? And you have to analyze whether a fight is fully scripted like that. Like Tendril, another fight which is fully scripted, pretty much. There are some variable instances with the dispels if you're ranged. Otherwise, fully scripted. So whenever that starts happening, check, is it something that's actually from a RNG standpoint that's making you uncomfortable? And if so, then you need to analyze your variable scripts. Or is it something that somebody else is messing up? So in that case, that's something that the raid is currently messing up. So then the number one thing to do would be first bring it up. Like, hey, why does this feel so chaotic? Why does this feel so inconsistent? This fight is scripted, right? It's timer based. And if that's the case, then we need to change the entirety of the raid script to then allow you to script on a consistent basis. On fights which cause more RNG, you need to then just analyze your variable scripts, but not only that, it's mostly from a camera positioning point of view and a pre-position point of view, right? So you have to keep your camera position consistent and being able to see the RNG factors of the pool and keep it consistent pool to pool, as well as have your pre-positioning in the right spot. A lot of times where those RNG mechanics feel off or feel very difficult is because either your camera was wrong or you pre-positioned it correctly. That would be the first 2 steps to kind of look at from there.
Okay. I was thinking also, like, I mean, this is definitely just mechanically for us as a group, like fire spreading into places where like I would normally be, or like changing where my camera typically is because of placement of where I can't be in the room, kind of.
Yeah.
But that obviously is like an extreme case where like that shouldn't be happening anyways.
Exactly. That's kind of an edge case where it would be something where you analyze that somebody else messed up, and you can sometimes, you need adaptability there to adjust, but that's not your default, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. So moving on. Now let's talk about flow. Flow is where you truly reach Galaxy Brain status. You have completed the entirety of the consistency pyramid, and you have understood your cognitive load, you've understood how you learn, you've understood everything, and now you've gotten to the point where it just happens. if you look up the flow state, it's an actual scientific study on how you move through different things that you have mastered. The flow state is something that you're always trying to achieve. Whenever you get there, you are truly just full muscle memory, going through the motions, and you're able to think fully almost 90% of your Kagi load just to things that go wrong in the pool and fixing them. The best players in the world are the ones that get there the fastest. They're the ones that create their scripts faster. They create their adaptability moments faster. They put in their details faster. The best players in the world reach the flow state the fastest to where all they're doing is adapting pool to pool. That's all they're thinking about based on what goes wrong. That's why they're the best players in the world. They can keep consistent every single pool no matter what, and they can fix things when they go wrong because they're so consistent in the first place. Now, let's talk briefly about the creation outline of consistency. Number 1, prep. Place your CDs by researching on Lorix.io and Warcraft logs. Understand the concepts behind those CDs. Test out those CDs yourself. Number 2, download the script. So what do I mean by download the script? Well, go look at a POV of one of the best players in the world. They've sat there and they've created a script for that fight. So go look at a POV of any of the top players and watch it through. And download exactly what they're doing. What is their script? Look at it. Look at their script, see what they're doing, try to understand why they're doing that. After that point, then you need to visualize yourself doing their script and what you need to do differently. So if you're visualizing and you're sitting there, you close your eyes, you're imagining from the pool timer and keep on going through the pool, seeing everything, going through variable instances in your head, and then you come out the other side and you see, okay, that made sense. Or you notice, hey, that felt a little weird, that didn't seem right in my head, or I'm a little confused on one part. Go look at their script again and then see what you need to adjust. Then as we go into the raid and we go into the early pools, you need to confirm your script. You need to confirm that the CD placements, that the positioning, the pre-positioning, the camera movements is all correct. And then adjust the things that felt wrong or were not getting the results that other player was seeing. For example, CD timings is a big one. Sometimes great players put CDs in really hard positions to get maximal efficiency out of. It's not hard for them, but it could be hard for you. That's because their rotation is fully passive. Your rotation still requires active thinking. In those scenarios, it's best that you adjust your script away from the most optimal to what is most optimal for you. Then, throughout the early pools, you are actively reproducing. Top of mind is this script. Top of mind the entire time. Then, as we reach middle progress, we're starting to get to phase 2, little bit of phase 3. The boss isn't close to dead yet, like we're getting there, but it is getting to a point where you are seeing things and you are seeing deeper into the fight. This is where you start adding in those details and you move and use passive transposition. Okay? So you are moving the active to passive. You have been actively reproducing your script. You're doing it 80%, 90% of the time perfectly. Now, move that to passive and confirm that it's okay whenever it's passive, that you're not losing anything from it. Then as we near a kill, that first time where you see that boss drop to what you thought that boss was going to die, and it feels like, oh man, or we're below 5%. And we just need to optimize boss damage. We've seen Enrage, and we need to optimize boss damage. That's the near kill phase. That's whenever your script should be fully passive and you make no adjustments. Literally 0. If you're going to make an adjustment at that point, you have to ask if it's okay. You cannot make any adjustment. Your camera movement, you cannot change it. Your defensive placement, you cannot change it. Your CD timing, you cannot change it. Your positioning, you cannot change it at this point. It is too late because other players have adapted their script around you. They have built their script around you and what you're doing. If you change it, we now reprogress again. You guys remember, I see the fucking healers talking to each other like little children in the chat. You guys remember Laradar, whenever we originally progged it. We got the boss down to 1% HP in like 6 pulls. And then we proceeded to take 35 more pulls. Because someone looked at that 1% pull and was like, oh, I didn't do so great there. Oh, I wasn't that good. And then they decided to change it. And you know what that did? It fucked us. It absolutely railed us for the next 30 fucking pulls because one of you retards decided to change your script, or multiple of you decided to change your script. And because of that, other people's scripts got fucked. And because of that, everything else got fucked. So make sure whenever it is near kill, no matter what, you do not adjust anything unless you ask. Then, at that point, you change your mindset on variable instancing. Whenever we are near a kill, your variable instancing mindset is now purely to fix mistakes, not to have a, new idea or move into a mechanic differently or trying to create a new variable instance. No. Your variable instancing at that point is purely whenever you see a mistake happen, boom, variably instanced into that section. After you see a mistake happen at near kill, it is really important whenever you see that you are close to a kill and you are trying to create a variable instance, that variable instance is purely for the mistake that was made. When you see a mistake made near a kill, you have to create a new variable instance script in case you see it again. That's what reduces pull counts. If you reduce pull counts that way, then that is where you are going to become one of the upper echelon of players. And that is the first part of creating consistency. And that is what makes players not good, but great. That is the difference between a CE player and a top 100 world player, is everything we just talked about. That is the difference. Take lesson 1, 2, and 3 and use those, the concepts that we talked about, how to learn, deliberate practice, types of players, types of improvement, how to improve, talking about how to go through logs, look at your own logs, rotationally, positionally, using VODs, problem solving, identifying problems. All of that leads here. All of it leads to creating your script, to creating your consistency. The more consistent you are, the better you are. I do not give a single fuck if you parse a 99. I do not give a single fuck if you got 3,500 IO. That's why that M+ players typically are seen as egomaniacs that just talk about their IO. It's because they sit there, and M+ is not about consistency. That is why M+, people say high-end M+ is hard. It is significantly easier than high-end raid. And I'm talking high-end raid as top 100 world. The reason why is because you don't have to be consistent in M+. So,
agreed.
Because of that, it creates this whole loop of people thinking that they're strong players, but then you get a 3,500 IO guy and he seems dog shit because he's not consistent. He just did it one time. He did it one time. That was it. That's all he had to do. The same thing happens inside of raid. I don't give a fuck if you 99 parse. The reason why I respect Hobbith is because Hobbith, and bless him, he's doing more damage now, but he never did a ton of damage. But that man never died and actually was consistent pull to pull. And it stood out because a lot of the rest of the raid was not consistent pull to pull, but Hobbith was. And Hobbith would do the same thing, pull to pull to pull to pull. And he would adjust, and he would learn. And that's what made Hobbith one of the top players in the guild, in my opinion. And that's what you all need to be doing. I'm not saying Hobbith is perfect at it. He was just someone who was at least doing it on a base level whenever the guild was weaker. And it was very nice to see. This is what makes you a great player. This is where you should be focusing pretty much all of your time, using the foundational concepts in lesson 1, 2, and 3. Any questions? All right, guys. That is all I have for you. If you want to watch a fantastic example of UI, that is a time-stamped video link, which will show you their opinions on UI and add-ons, how to create a good UI. If you have questions on that, we can have a discussion afterwards. Highly would recommend actually watching this entire video. It's really great info. It's time-stamped all at the bottom so that you can go through and you can click through. The first half of this is not actually talking about how to get better at WoW. The second half is. But right here is where they start talking about UI and how important it is and what you should actually be doing. And they talk about UI. This is a 1.5 hour podcast on how to actually get better at WoW, and 45 minutes, actually more than that, over half of this entire podcast is on UI. That's how important it is. You guys think that I'm sitting here and I'm being mean to you, right? I'm calling your UI trash and I'm telling you that you need to change it and that you should use Atrocity. But honestly, it is legitimately one of the most important things to you as a player. I'd highly, highly recommend watching that. If not, then you will lose out on quite a bit of extra info that you could get from some of the top minds on UI stuff in the game. Otherwise, that's all I've got. Good luck creating your consistencies, crafting consistency, and I will see you guys tomorrow for Raid.